What I want to say, I would like to thank all those who take part in this forum and experts who take part in this forum too. I wish to express my gratitude to all those who attend here and represent a variety of schools from the Association of Schools for Political Studies under the Council of Europe, and its directors that also attend this meeting, and its participants because they are well aware of what it means to, what is the school about, what is the Council of Europe, and why they are here. To all people that do not know the school so well, who do not know, I would also express my sincere gratitude too. I wish to thank all the foundations, all those who support us. And today, it is the Bush Foundation who host this event. I would like to extend my special thanks our excellent foundations, foreign foundations, who have been supporting the life and work of Moscow, of the Moscow School. For all those who are new to this event, for whom it is the first time to attend an event like this, and for those who know little about the school, may I remind you, literally in a couple of words. Today, it is the 24th anniversary since its inception, since it came into being. And this happened. So the decision to set up this school, to start this school, was made possible as close friends of ours, Diana Pinto and Dominique Moisy, introduced us to a fantastic organization that the Council of Europe is. And I will remember when the Secretary General at that time of the Council of Europe attended to visit the President of the Russian Federation of that time, Boris Yeltsin, and she had an audience with him. Then the French friends, Dominique, telephoned me and said, Lena, then the Secretary General and his delegation, I suppose, they will call on you. You live very close to the White House, and then you will meet her. Please, he said, since I'm a person from the Soviet Union, please don't confuse the European Union with the Council of Europe. I said, of course, I'm perfectly aware of that. And then they called on us at home, the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Catherine Lalumiere, present here in this room, Jack Hunnings is also present here in this room, and some other people who represent the high positions and high posts in the Council of Europe. And at the end of the meeting, they suddenly said, why don't you give us your, whatever you have to do about your school? Gave them this sheets of paper where some facts were written about the school. And I'd like to say that this was probably a different time we lived in then, but you and I at the time were just amazed. We were really, really deeply moved how this could have happened, that such an official organization, high-ranking officials, the Secretary General of the Council of Europe then says, why don't we try together with you to set up this project? We were people from the street. They did not know, like all civic activity, it's grassroots level, and that really impressed me so much. This left a unique impression with me. And in all those years that the school has been working, I would like to say that it all lasted. And I'd like to say that in part that elan when the most, I'd like to say, difficult and sometimes very difficult and complicated work, we try to live up to the confidence they placed in us then. Then it was the confidence and live up to it. To the private civic initiatives of those people who actually had lived all their lives in the Soviet reality, in the Soviet state, with all those skills and those habits and likes or dislikes, whatever, but we all date back to wearing the Soviet coat. This is an allusion to Google. So I'd like to once again say before this audience that in our civic activity for all of us, the only thing that matters, that is trust. I'd like to thank our colleagues in the school. I won't give their names. Right now you know them, or many of you will meet them during these days. And their fantastic hard work of those people who have convictions and live up to them, because the conditions in which we now have been working are not at all simple. They are difficult, sophisticated, and this is something that requires you not only to show professional activity, but you have to demonstrate
the persuasion that you are working professionally, the persuasion that every day you're taking a risk. You're taking a risk in the full sense of the word. We have come here, we have convened here today as people united by faith in freedom, as people who think that any violence, any kind of violence, whether it is coming from a terrorist or if it is coming from the state, a state violence, we are not putting up with this. We are not agreeing with this. We are, and we believe ourselves to be people who are free and hence are responsible. We are assuming so much freedom as we can personally pay for. We have entered a very difficult time. We are in dire straits, not just in Russia, but also in Europe, where we are today, and the ability to uphold our beliefs, the ability to live with this sense of civic dignity is the purpose and the reason for us to be here. It is my great pleasure to give the floor to the representative and the head of our program.
As Lena and Nemirovskaya just said, we have very many honored and special guests with us today. So I will also refrain from listing them and welcoming them individually, but include them all and you all in a universal, very heartfelt welcome, as I think befits a conference that searches for universalism. It's already the second time that we meet here, and I'm very happy to see and very pleased that interest is no lower than it was last year. It may be even more difficult to fit in all the people this time, and it's one of the few times that I really wished we had an even bigger audience, meaning audience hall, here in the center of Berlin, because I know that many more would have liked to come, but we just can't fit any more people into this room, as you see. And I hope that we will find a place to sit for those that are still remaining standing. So thank you for taking this effort to be with us, although we don't even have a seat for you. So this is the second time we meet in search of lost universalism. And after 1 year, you could well ask, well, did we get any closer in finding it? I don't know. Individually, some of us may have come closer to it. As a group of those that have gathered here, as Lena said, those that are standing for the idea of freedom, we may be. But if we look around us in the world, we definitely have not come any closer to universalism than we were last year in October. At least this is what I believe. Lena has already mentioned that the situation has gone more difficult, not only in Russia, but all over the world. And if you just watch any given news program today, most of the news you will find are either about violence in whatever form it may occur, or a frightening disruption in any society the news people chose to cover. From the campaigning in the United States, to the campaigning over Brexit, to whatever happens even in my country, we see a lot of drifting apart, a lack of cohesion, and, as Lena said, a lack of trust. This may have been an issue that was more or less exclusive to the post-Soviet space, but it is no longer. Even the West, whose tradition of democracy has long been built on mutual trust, seems to shake in that foundation. So what can we do as those people that stand for the search for universalism and for the freedom as many of us can, as much as any of us can carry, as Lena put it? I do believe that conferences like these, but mostly that what we do every day in between these meetings, will help us to create a sense of citizenship that transcends our national boundaries, even if we're bound by a national identity or even regional identity, where we carry most of the load of our responsibility for mutual respect and a peaceful way of living with each other. In gatherings like these, we are reminded that our responsibility, in fact, transcends these national boundaries, and that the only answer we can have as citizens is a sense of globalized citizenship, of globalized citizen enlightenment that will help us to overcome the kind of cleavages that have occurred in the past years or so. I see no other way than having civil society as a whole and a new enlightenment work on these issues together. And thus I'm particularly pleased that we have representatives here from very many countries. Many of you have maybe seen my name under your visa application, so I have an idea of to how many different places of the world we have sent the invitations, and I'm very happy that so many of you can follow. So we'll have a discussion that will actually not be focused only on the issues of the post-Soviet space, but of issues of global citizenship and universalism indeed. So I wish us all a very fruitful conference and meetings. I thank you all for coming. I thank the Moscow School for putting this thing together with us, and all of the other supporters and colleagues, in particular the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung and the colleagues from the German-Russian Exchange, whom I've seen earlier, yes. Sorry? And the Norwegian Institute, and I'm sure I've missed out on someone. So everyone who helped to put this together and make this a fruitful and interesting program for all of us. So please enjoy your stay with us, and I hope that staying doesn't mean to be on your feet all the time, so I'll look for some more chairs. So thank you very much for coming, and have a good time here in Berlin. I'm mixing the councils all the time. I'm European, but I'm getting this.
Yes, Council of Europe. Thank you very much, Atje. Good morning, everyone. First of all, Lena, Yuri, the Moscow School, thank you very much for inviting me again. I congratulate you on your anniversary. I wish you many happier returns in the future. I'm very pleased to be here, although I had to wake up very early. Very, very early. And when I was traveling to Berlin this morning, I was looking over my speech, which was a good, solid Council of Europe speech. It covered all the points, connected all the dots: democracy, human rights, rule of law. But then I thought it was a little bit institutional, almost bureaucratic. And we all know what you think about bureaucracy. So it got me worried. So in that state of altered lucidity that occurs when you wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, I decided to ditch that speech and give you another one that will be a little bit less institutional, perhaps a little bit more personal, and probably also much less coherent, for which I apologize. But I would start with a story, a fictional story that occurred to me this morning when I was traveling. Completely fictional and unrealistic. But imagine for a moment if the discussions between Russia and the United States on the crisis in Syria, against all expectations, would have resulted on an agreement on a ceasefire that would hold. And then that they would succeed to bring together all the warring factions into an effective fight against Daesh and defeat them, and then finally conclude a lasting peace agreement that would bring end of war and suffering to the people of Syria. And then imagine that, inspired by that, Saudi Arabia and Iran would sit down at a table, work out their differences, create basis for political stabilization of Iraq and end of hostilities in Yemen, and lay down foundations for a lasting reconciliation between Shiite and Sunni Muslims. And then Egypt suddenly would find itself in a new situation and would embark on a series of bold political, social, and economic reforms. And then many countries in the region would follow suit. And finally, Israel, initially skeptical about all these sudden developments, would realize that there is a real opportunity, would sit down, agree on a two-state solution with Palestinians, with Jerusalem as a common joint capital of two friendly neighboring states. And not only that, and then all the leaders in the region would sit together and work out arrangements to work together, to cooperate together on trade, on managing resources, water resources, petrol. Create a Middle Eastern community and agree that they would cooperate on the basis of common values and sign a Middle Eastern Convention of Human Rights. Now, I know it sounds ridiculous. It sounds completely unrealistic. It's a fantasy, and I know. But I'm telling you this because, as unlikely as it seems, it's a fitting illustration of a monumental achievement that Europe has managed to do in its history, in spite of its history. I don't know, I'm not a fortune teller. I don't know if the people in the Middle East will find the courage, the ways, the hope, the strength to end the periods of instability and war and conflict. But we know that Europe has done so. That 60-odd years ago, it has used the experience of the worst of what it was capable of two world conflicts, of the worst ever crime committed by human beings against other human beings, to create the antithesis of its own history. It has created Europe as a political project in order to protect itself from itself. It has created the basis for a universalist, cosmopolitan Europe as a peace accord, as a peace agreement, and Europe as a political project. through the European Union and the Council of Europe remains principally a peace agreement, one that has effectively held for 60 years and is now under pressure. And that link between never again and the European project is not just symbolic, it's not just political, it's legal. Some say that the first legal act that paved the way for the creation of the European Union and the Council of Europe was the Treaty of London. Not the one that created the Council of Europe in 1949, but the one that created the Nuremberg Tribunal of August 1945, because it introduced a new notion of crimes against humanity which did not exist before in the international law. And it has introduced the criminal responsibility of heads of state and government. And there are two important things in this that I think are essential for the future development, for the development that followed of the European project. First, the end of the notion of absolute sovereignty of national state over the subjects within its borders. And second, the importance it gave to the rule of law and human rights as the fundaments of a liberal democracy, and to liberal democracy as the fundament of peace and stability and security. Now we fast forward 60 years, and where are we now with that fundamentals of peace and stability and security, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law? I recently saw the first result of a research that YouGov is conducting with the university in Essex, it has not yet finished, on people's attitudes in 12 European countries, their political opinions, asking them to what extent they identify themselves with the ideas of authoritarian populism, which is, I think, a concept that dates from the 80s, but it's characterized by intense dislike for foreigners, intense dislike for human rights, international protection of human rights, intense dislike for European Union, European integration. And the results? There are 46% in the United Kingdom that identify themselves with these ideas, 47 in Italy, 63 in France, where I live. And when you go to Central Eastern Europe, the numbers are even higher. In Germany, to give you the full picture, it's 18. Another research before Brexit has shown that 70% of coverage of media in the United Kingdom on human rights was negative. 80% in England itself, in the country that gave us Magna Carta. Now, these people who support these ideas, we're not going to get anywhere just by telling them they have misunderstood, that they're stupid, that they got it all wrong. Because they have legitimate grievances, they have preoccupations that are existing, they're real, about jobs, employment, security. But the problem is that they have been seduced by peddlers of false solutions, by populists, by authoritarian populists that are gaining ground. And it was ground that we have ceded them, I think, far too willingly. And we have to gain back that ground. We have growing support for illiberal democracy across Europe. Now, I don't know about what you think about illiberal democracy. I'm 50 years old. I come from Slovenia, which means that half of my life I lived in a country that was people's democracy. It wasn't the worst of the authoritarian regimes you've ever seen. You know, we had some good times, and I still have feel very close connection to my friends in other parts of Yugoslavia. But it wasn't free. And there's no such thing as an almost democracy. You cannot cut freedom in small pieces. You're either free or you're not free. There's no such thing as illiberal freedom. And I think at best, these almost democracies are dysfunctional. And at worst, they're harmful because they're offering wrong solutions, dangerous solutions to real problems, and undermining our capacity to respond to these problems in a rational, effective, joint, humane way. They're undermining that concept of universalist, cosmopolitan Europe that we have been building since after the Second World War. And I was thinking about the title, In Search of Lost Universalism. I don't think it's lost. I think we're ditching it. We're throwing it away in an act of deliberate, self-harmful act of irresponsibility. And in the Council of Europe, we are very concerned, of course, about that. You would not be surprised. And that's why the second Secretary General's report, now for the third one, on the state of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law in Europe, is concentrating on the issue of democratic security. Because it recognizes that fundamentally, peace, stability, and security in Europe depends on the strength of the tenets of liberal democracy across Europe. And the results are very preoccupying. The situation from year to year is going from bad to worse. One, on the issue of judiciary. We may have legislation in most European countries, 47 of them, but we still have, in many of them, too many of them, serious problems with the independence of the judiciary or the perception of the independence of the judiciary. And when people don't trust their judiciary, they are not going to trust the institutions, and you're not going to have a democracy that's going to function. When it comes to freedom of expression, the situation is going from bad to worse. Physical threats, intimidation, arrests, but also other ways, systemic pressures on media are growing across Europe, not only in the countries which are every day, and rightly so, in the media, but across Europe. Media is finding it more and more difficult to carry out its essential role in a functioning liberal democracy. On the internet, freedom of expression that has gave us so much hope that is going to open up new spaces of communication and exchanging information is turning into a sort of closed ecosystem in which emotions disguised as information are being circulated between like-minded individuals in order to reconfirm the previously adopted positions. The space for civil society is shrinking in many parts of Europe. I don't have to tell that to Lena and to others. Again, preventing them from playing that essential role in making sure that the democracy can function. Political institutions are being taken over by that attitude of using majority to rewrite the rules of democratic conduct in an illegitimate or difficult or dangerous way. And the fifth pillar of democratic security, inclusive society, shows that our societies are less and less inclusive, more and more exclusive, more and more divided, and that polarization is being exploited and directed on the differences in identity, negative, exclusive identity, ethnicity, religion. So divisions are growing deeper, tensions are growing deeper, and that, of course, is not without risks. Now, I'm not an alarmist. I don't want to be overly dramatic. I'm not saying if, the European Union closes its doors tomorrow, the Council of Europe closes its doors, there's going to be a war that will erupt in Europe the next day. I don't think so, actually. But the question is, do we really want to take the risk to find out what happens if we dismantle, get rid of the mechanism that has been protecting peace and stability and security on our continent for almost 7 decades? I was at a conference last week in Strasbourg, and there was a professor of economy in there who said, well, that argument about peace, it's no longer sufficiently convincing. And I said, I hope so. Because when the argument of peace becomes bloody evident to everybody, it risks to be perhaps already too late. And if I can finish on a personal note about that, as I said, when I was 25 years old, I returned in June from the College of Europe, where I was studying with young people from all across Europe and all across the world, spending a year studying European communities law. And I came back to my country, and the only thing I had in mind is how I'm going to spend my summer. Adriatic coast, a weekend in Barcelona, meeting friends in London. And then I was certain that there would be a fantastic career waiting for me one way or the other in the autumn. What happened is that on the 26th of June, 91, I was awakened by the noise of tanks and military boots in the street of my city, Ljubljana. And I realized at that moment, with an alarming clarity, as many other people across Europe after, other parts of Europe after that, in even more dramatic fashion, more tragic fashion, that war is not just something that is happening elsewhere. It's not just something that is happening to other people. Thank you.
Слово мадам Lalumiere, генеральному секретарю Совета Европы в тот момент, когда создавалась школа. Mesdames et messieurs, chers collègues, je vous laisse quelques secondes.
Dear colleagues, allow me please to say a few words in French, if I may, and it is my pleasure to do so, and I've been doing it as a President of the Association of Schools of Political Studies in the Council of Europe. It has been a year since we last met here at the Congress in Berlin. The topic that was proposed then has remained unchanged, and very much like last year, I'm now discussing this in my capacity as the President of the Association of the Schools of Political Studies under the Council of Europe. I would like to thank you. I would like to extend my sincere thanks for the invitation to speak here. I would like to thank the Council of Europe, but I would also like to thank the Robert Bush Foundation for the generosity that you have shown to us. I would like to thank you for the remarkable personal contribution of my friends, Lena Nemirovskaya. And so between our Congress last year and the Congress of this year, there is certain similarity. However, the political situation in Europe has changed since then. A space of democracy, of the rule of law, of human rights, and overall of humanitarian and humanistic values. This space has been shrinking. Certainly, last year, too, we could observe a very serious level of dysfunction, or let me put it this way, almost failure of this mechanism. But today the situation has grown worse. We can see it, an example of Great Britain. We can see it in every continent. We can see that the situation has grown worse across the world and in every continent. But let me please focus on Europe here, on what we call Greater Europe, the Europe of the Council of Europe, as well as the Europe of the European Union. I wish in no way to review it exhaustingly, but I would like to limit myself to the 3 points. First, we are looking at a certain concept of democracy that has been evolving, that that has been completely changing and turning away from what we are accustomed to calling democracy in the Council of Europe and in the European Union and in the Western world as a whole. That means to say that about the type of public and of the state that is based on two sets of characteristics. On the one hand, characteristics that we may, if we may put it this way, mechanical. That means that the democracy is based upon popular support, which in its turn is expressed in free and fair election. That is to say that it is elections that are the first foundation of such democracy. If I may put it this way, this is the engineering, or this is how democracy works. But this is the first set of characteristics, and that should be supplemented with a second set of characteristics. That is, democracy means some contents and some substance that stands behind it. That means respect for humanistic and humanitarian values, respect to the rule of law, respect for law, including international law, division of government, and system of checks and balances, and so on. In brief, democracy for us implies certain mechanisms and a certain substance, or the meaning of such mechanisms. Surely, in the historic time that we now call communism, the USSR has adopted a very different concept of democracy, of so-called popular democracy, or people's democracy. But after the collapse of the Berlin Wall and after the post-communist countries exceeded our Western organizations, the world seemed to have adopted a universal, common concept of Western system of democracy, with these two subsets of democracy, of what we call in terms of shape and form, engineering, or in terms of its substance. But nowadays this remarkable unanimity is under continuous and outrageous attack. We can see that a new concept of democracy has been evolving, which sometimes we in French sometimes refer to it as démocrature or democrature, very much like caricature, probably. Caricature, meaning that it is a sort of mock. I don't know how the interpreters which word they would use for this, but we in French would call it democrature, or mock democrature, if you will. This is the interpreter suggesting this term. So we're discussing the term which probably that we have seen evolve in the recent years. It means that the practice of these democratures is about its only base is popular support. That is, if such support is expressed at a certain election, then this government has the right to, with absolute impunity, to do whatever they choose, including violations of the fundamental freedoms, such as the principle of the rule of law, and so on. It means that the only thing that matters is gaining popular support. Regrettably, this way we are sliding down to populism, demagogue support, and in fact to things that it is mostly populist trends that seem to be assuming paramount importance, and people who are experiencing, say, natural fear before terror attacks, or in other words, simply do not have due maturity or knowledge. Nowadays, many of the countries are afflicted with, it's like gangrene that they've been experiencing with populism, and many politicians make the most of it. Yes, they stand to win, they win at the elections, yes, they win the referenda, very much like in the UK, and hence the conclusion is made that they are now free to do whatever they choose with impunity. In point of fact, we are speaking about we're saying that people like this claim that they have been received the blessing, sort of their nation, of their people, and the people are the source of the greatest power. But alas, how many crimes have been committed in the name of the will of the people. We can see and we realize that this is a disease that could be only cured through education. Education, education, and once again education. Last year we spoke about the absolute importance and relevance of this concept. We have to understand that without proper education, our compatriots actually will not be properly equipped to withstand and oppose this populism. And let me please discuss yet another dangerous trend. This year, we, for the first time in many years, saw the growth of nationalism that is going beyond what we are accustomed to seeing. Not in Europe alone. Nationalism has been rising across the globe. And Mr. Gruden just mentioned it. We should understand that this continent was the cradle of the nation concept, of the concept of state, as well as of the nation state. This led us to the ongoing hostilities, fratricidal wars that have been inflicting Europe for many hundreds of years, and so that in the 20th century we saw utmost horrors. The European buildings after 1945, and this is the European peace rose from this desire to overcome the excesses and the horrors of nationalism. Europe, a new Europe, was born out of the wish to live in peace and harmony. Overall, we succeeded. Now, today, the world is reigning across the European continent in principle. At least, this is something we can say with certainty. Our countries, this is something that brought them together, and the fall of the Berlin Wall helped Europeans come together in the Council of Europe. However, regrettably, regrowth of nationalistic ideas, and it is something that is posing a horrible threat to us. We are perfectly aware that many European politicians, Mr. Orban in Hungary, as they speak for closure of national boundaries, speaking that they need to build walls, they claim that they are the best proponents of Europe and defenders of Europe, of its culture and its values and its identity. But in point of fact, it's quite the opposite. Europe was built because and in the spirit of openness. That was not simple, but overall, the European culture is based upon the ideas of universality, ideas of attracting and borrowing ideas and knowledge, on developing curiosity and inquisitiveness, and finally, belief into inevitable progress. So the European spirit is the spirit of openness, and it is not the spirit of isolation of closed borders. Isolationism, fear before others, and xenophobia, racism. This is something that surely will not preserve Europe. In moral terms, that is, to destroy it. Surely the Europeans are, that was the spirit of openness, which back in 1989 allowed the Council of Europe to extend a hand to those countries that exceeded us, and first and foremost to Hungary, and then Poland. Today, alas, many Hungarians and Poles say that they would like to shut down. But we should remember that back in 1989, the very fact that they were that the older democracies of Europe would accept them. That was not something that was guaranteed. So allow me please to end in the third point I wish to make about the ailments of modern democracy. Our democracies, European democracy amongst others, are facing an unresolved problem. That is an ability to involve, or if you will, mobilize our citizens for the common project. For a common project. Our democratic governments at times think about how to make some things done, but they rarely think why and for which purpose we need to do that. So we deliberately discussed institutions and rules about the law. However, we tend to ignore or we tend to disregard some common political project that should make sense of our efforts, make sense of all what we do. In other words, why is it that the citizens have to do something or take part in projects? At least in the past, a number of our countries, in a number of our states, with a remarkable they could be very hard in drawing their line. Let's recall the colonial empires or what is known as the American dream. But nowadays we can see something quite different. Well, let us remember the dynamism which accompanied the American dream, that remarkable engine in the United States that helped them achieve, that country achieve its nadir in 20th century. Let's remember how recently President Putin achieved surprising support of his nation at the election, returning to the Russian people the pride, giving back the pride and certainty in their future. In Europe nowadays, we are seeing very different trends, regrettably. We do not see any purpose or any vision that could bring us together. We can see it at the level of the European Union and individual member states, many of whose citizens can see in the world around them, they can see threats and they perceive it as a threat. So the citizens of many European countries seek to cling to their national identity, and they think this is something that is like a life jacket. As to the European Union per se, it regrettably is not quite always inspiring people. Why is that so? Well, many say there is a certain coldness of the European Union. I remember my colleague Eli Barnavi was speaking about frigid Europe, about remote, distant Europe, about bureaucratic Europe, Europe devoid of its vision of the future of its own project. Well, for sure, the programs are being drafted and commissions continue to sit and to say that it has been publishing all the required programs, but regrettably many of these programs are fully limited to materialistic aspects, and they may be, say, economic, financial, but for sure this is needed. Who would dispute that? This is very serious indeed, but we shouldn't tend to forget that it does not correlate with our feelings, especially when they tend to disregard social dimension. And programs like this, regrettably, cannot inspire enthusiasm or anybody to feel fond of them. Surely Europe has a remarkable heritage that it has inherited in terms of culture, in terms of spirituality. This is something people tend to forget. Solidarity, brotherhood, solidarity, all these words, and social cohesion, all these words, yes, we can find them in official texts and documents of the European Union, but alas, European institutions do make few attempts or do little to make sure that these notions irradiate the light and the spirit that they have. The Council of Europe seeks to make its own contribution, and I certainly have to assess highly the attempts, to value highly these attempts, even if they're not a great success. And this way or another, we keep saying that democracy cannot exist without political philosophy, which would help us make sense of it. If it is not based upon this philosophy, if it does not have the conviction, this notion about good and evil, if it's devoid of its soul, this sort of democracy is losing its vitality and then is dying. These are the objectives we are seeing before us in the early days of the 21st century. We live in a world fraught with paradoxes. We've got powerful instruments and communication tools at hand, and at that, regrettably, we can see a certain decline in our ability and desire to think. We've got the tools, we've got the means, but there's no contents. The fundamental questions, fundamental ideas remain very superficial and underdeveloped. We have remarkable scholars, engineers, experts, brilliant specialists. However, very often we have a very mediocre political class at that. To the right or to the left of the political spectrum. In other words, and at the end, let me please say that democracy is based upon these sophisticated equations of balance, and for it to work properly, democracy requires involvement of each and every one of us. That is, schools of political studies under the Council of Europe, following the path that we will take. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And I think that these very inspiring words are being said here for us to uphold our spirit, for us to come back to this state of living mind, as the philosopher Merab Mamardashvili used to say. This urge to come to the living mind is one of the underlying precepts of this Congress. My very precious thanks to all of you. And before we proceed, let me consider a question which is very important for the organizers, which is in a way personal. Why is it that we think that such a forum may become important for understanding the crisis which has gangrenized Europe and the rest of the world? The world is changing fast. The scientific and industrial revolution of the 17th century has led us into a new dimension, into a new universe. The enormous knowledge plant has emerged in Europe over the past 250 years. This enormous world of new information which gave breath to this mind-boggling velocity of communications. The consumerism society is at the same time the world of advertising. It is also the world of non-free choices in many cases. Radio, television, the internet. The concept of the so-called golden billion is a living testimony to this balance between the so-called developed and developing countries. We can see these disbalances, disequilibrium under globalization and in the instability of the world resources. But at the same time, globalization has led to yet another crisis. The crisis which we are seeing in every country, in every member state of the Council of Europe and outside of the Council of Europe. The crisis between groups of population within each country. Those who can reap the harvest of globalization and those who, for various reasons, and they may indeed be because of their lazy, some people, but these are the people who do not have access to the fruits of the globalized world. And this is what the populist politicians are trying to do. They are trying to turn to these very social strata, to these social groups who are trying to talk about the cultural exceptionality. Any exceptionality, cultural or religious. Any sense of an exceptional nature of a country leads to an even deeper crisis. The inability to solve problems in a peaceful way can take us to only one terrible result, which is the war. What can we do to dispel this? The philosophers believe that faith without ideology is metaphysics. And I am prepared to take this, to accept this, because I think that I understand the country where we are right now. We are opening this forum dedicated to the topic of universalism here in Berlin, in Germany. The post-war experience of which tells us that the entire country, entire culture may go through the experience of penance, the experience of repentance. We are in that same land which at one time was in the hands of the Nazis, but it is now an entirely different country. It is a country which knows the value of redemption. And this is important not just for new generations, for the young generations. This is important for the entire world, in every country, for every person. To me, the experience of post-war Germany is one of the central experiences that shaped my life, if I may pretend to say it. Let me only quote two names of German intellectuals, Ralph Dahrendorf and Jürgen Habermas. I was fortunate to have known them in my life. The young years of Dahrendorf and Habermas fell on the years of Nazism. And when they were young people, they saw the post-war humiliation of Germany. Here in this hall, Jutta Scherer, my valuable and great friend, is here in the hall. Through her biography, I know this experience. To this generation in Germany, the concept of reconciliation, the concept of civil accord had not only a theoretical value, but also a very practical significance. The books of Habermas and Dahrendorf are dedicated to the subjects of conflicts. Dahrendorf considered the question as to how it is possible to overcome conflict and to recognize the uniting purposes in this world. According to Habermas, in the basis of such consensus are the communicative acts. The communicative acts aimed at improving interhuman communication. The two theories are complementary and supplement each other. And in this, I see the intellectual power. The intellectual power which imparts to us today, to all of us in this hall, the effort and indeed the energy to go ahead, to continue to uphold the concept of the rule of law, transparency, and human rights. In this regard, let me also recall one other name, a name which is very important to my generation, which is the name of Václav Havel, who believed that dictatorship first starts in our heads. But those who have come to this forum, us, we want to know that our active civic stance, that our active civic position makes it possible to overcome this dictatorship which rules or may rule our mind and even our hearts sometimes. And maybe this is a futile hope, but I don't think so. Havel said, "Hope is not a conviction that everything will be good. Hope is a confidence, is that what you're doing is valuable irrespective of the end." Merab Mamardashvili liked to say that we work without any hope for success. In my view, a citizen is a responsible and active person. It is indeed one of the most meaningful figures in today's world. Civil culture is something that can be supplemented to any cultural identity. This is something which we bring in ourselves in an everyday effort to be a citizen. For this reason, the motto of this school is civic enlightenment to a civil society. Thank you.